how should the chainsaw run? When we start to look at different situations, oftentimes I discuss a little bit about how a chainsaw or trimmer or whatever two-cycle should be adjusted. And I hear a lot of comments back and say, well, I really don't want my people, or I don't want people taking a screwdriver to the carburetor because they could really blow up an engine and we'd have trouble with the equipment. But I think I see and hear about more chainsaws and trimmers blown up from lack of adjustment than I do somebody trying to adjust them. So you don't have to have a screwdriver to adjust the chainsaw or trimmer. You just have to know when it's out of adjustment. It's kind of like with saw chain. You don't have to be the one to sharpen your saw chain, but you do need to, as an operator, know when it's sharp and when it's dull. And these 5 checks can be done very easily. The first is making sure that the air filter is clean, and we do that on the RDT side of it, but we also need to make sure that it's clean from the standpoint of carburetor adjustment or run check. The second is we want to look at starting it up, all right? And more or less, we want to let it warm up. So this would be that we have a piece of equipment that is mechanically sound. It will start up and run. If it doesn't start, that's a different checklist. But more or less, this is we want to start it up with a clean air filter and let it warm up. Then we go directly to wide open throttle. And we set and listen to the high speed. And we call that sound at high speed the flutter. Some people call it 2-stroking, 4-stroking, but more or less, when you go wide open with it, it's going to go up to wide open throttle and level out. And so we call that flutter. Then these 3 all happen at idle, okay? And so first thing we're looking for at idle is the chain should idle. You never want to operate a chainsaw when you let off the throttle that the chain continues to creep or spin around. As soon as you let off the throttle, the chain should start deceleration and then stop on the bar. That's without the chain brake. So you want to make sure that clutch that we looked at, the centrifugal clutch, is disengaging. And so that's what happens if your idle is set correctly. The chain stops turning. Number 4 is it should idle in all positions. In other words, it should continue to idle until it more or less runs out of fuel. And step 5, if it idles okay, when we hit the throttle, it should accelerate back up to wide open throttle without any hesitation. And that's the 5 steps. So what do these screws do? And what does that 5-step actually check? So here what happens, air filter is clean. And what happens is when that piston, when you pull the rope and the piston goes up, it creates a negative pressure down here in the crankcase. So it goes up, it sucks air, just like sucking on a straw through the air filter if it's clean. Then it compresses it down a little bit as it goes through the carburetor body and the carburetor throat. Air increases its movement velocity, and that's where it's sprayed with fuel. And where does a 2-cycle engine get its fuel from? You mix your gas and oil together. That's how it's lubricated. So it continues down this port and into the crankcase. And a very light mixture of fuel and air then fills the crankcase. You see, there's not a 1 quart or a 6 quart sump that keeps oil there to lubricate the bottom end on a chainsaw or trimmer. More or less, that oil and air mixture saturates and covers the rod, the wrist pin, the crankshaft, the rod bearings and seals. And so all of that happens with that fuel mix that you mix. Then when that piston goes down, it forces that mixture up to the combustion area. So you think about it, the piston goes up, fills the bottom. Piston starts down, it squishes it and pushes it up there. Then on the next trip up, just before top dead center, bam, the spark plug explodes that mixture. And at that point, the momentum is just before top dead center. That momentum continues up just a little bit in what they call the squash area, and more or less then pushes the burn gases and air out of the exhaust system into the muffler. And so that's how it works. Piston goes up, fills the bottom. Piston goes down, pushes to the top. Piston goes back up, fills the bottom, explodes, and it just continues that two-stroke. You see, that two-stroke engine and the chainsaw trimmer is nothing but an air pump. You have a fixed amount of air that it's moving from top to bottom. It's pulling it in, compressing it, pushing it up, and going out the exhaust. It's nothing but an air pump. What you're doing with these screws is you're more or less putting fuel into that airflow. And so important that we have that adjusted correctly. So let's look and see what these screws do. The H screw, if I turn it to the right, it takes away fuel. If I turn it to the left, it adds fuel. That's for high speed. It only works at wide open throttle. The butterfly in the carburetor is wide open. So there we should have our flutter adjusted. It shouldn't be continuing to run away. It should be coming up to a steady flutter. Then we let off the throttle. If the chain is creeping, we don't go to the L screw. We go to the T screw, or on your steels it's an LA screw, lower idle adjustment. When you turn this screw to the right, it idles up. When you turn it to the left, it idles down. It's just like opening and closing this throttle trigger is all it does. You can't hurt anything. All it's doing, if you do have it too high though, it engages that centrifugal clutch and starts to turn your chain around. So you want to make sure that it's idling without the chain turning. That puts you pretty much in the low speed circuit of the carburetor, okay? The L screw then, turn it to the right, takes away fuel. Turn it to the left, adds fuel. That's where these two checks come in. If it sits there in all positions, you roll it over, puffs smoke and goes dead every time you pick it up, you've got too much fuel. So basically it's puddling up in the crankcase. And so when you start to look at that, all those positions, when you roll it over too much, it goes into the port and just chokes it out. Then if you make it past that, when you hit the throttle, if it accelerates, you're good to go. But if it doesn't, in other words, you hit the throttle, it kind of hesitates before it goes up, or it dies when you hit the throttle, you don't have enough fuel. And so in these two cases, in all positions, it would probably be too rich. You would lean it out a little bit to the right. If you hit the throttle and it hesitates, you don't have enough fuel to create the power. So you got to open that L screw to the left. And that's the check. But as I said, you don't have to have a screwdriver to adjust it. All you got to know is it's out of adjustment. And I say this quite often to the groups is you think about, if I was to pick you and I say, okay, I want you to go out there and cut that stump down for me. If you get a chainsaw and you get it started, you're going to cut the stump. But if you know that that chainsaw that you picked up to cut the stump is not operating correctly, it's either running too lean or too rich, then you could make a decision. And that's what the operator needs to do. If it's not adjusted properly, you need to take it to somebody who drives a screwdriver. If not, all you need to do is handle the task. So carburetor adjustment and the run is a very, very important part to the life of the engine as well as safety to the operator.